Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Golden Triangle Asian Elephant Foundation Elephant Professional Lecture. A day late, and what's the phrase? A day late and a dollar short. Maybe not a dollar short. I don't know. But yesterday we were going to go ahead, but Andrew got stuck in the field. He's going to talk a little bit about his eagle chasing, the eagle chasing he was doing. But really, he's here to talk about the most fascinating piece of elephants, the most useful piece of an elephant's anatomy. The research he has done into elephants' trunks. We watch them all the time on the live streams, and we comment all the time about how dexterous they are, if you can be dexterous without a hand, how useful they are, how elephants would not be able to survive without them, and how they've developed. Although there is one actually orphan elephant who I'm watching very closely in Samburu in Kenya, who has lost her trunk to a snare. And is surviving, but with a lot of help from keepers. Very, very unusual, and almost it would be impossible to live in the wild without a trunk. So to know more about the science behind the elephant's trunk, what it can do, hopefully answer the festering question that has divided our group. Is it one muscle, or is it one muscle with 40,000 bundles, or is it 40,000 muscles? And I'm not sure he can answer this, but I have warned him I would ask the question. I will now hand you over to Andrew Shulz, who has published the paper and has done the work and knows more about elephants' trunks scientifically and biomechanically than the rest of us put together. Over to you, Andrew.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay, John? Everything's good?
Perfect.
Great. So I guess I didn't make a slide for it, but I normally have a slide that talks about, is it a myth that the elephants have 40,000 muscles? And I have some CT scans actually of an elephant trunk that I'll go through here and today. But what I wanted to start with is kind of explain a little bit of the title, elephant's trunks, the muscular multi-tool. And this is something that my advisor, Dr. David Hu, and I talked about. It's really amazing. You have this one muscular appendage that's able to do so many different things and to move in so many different ways. And they really, it is a multi-tool for them. They don't just use it like we use our hands to grab, right? They use it for a bunch of different senses. So I'm excited to talk about this today. And then I will end talking some about conservation. So I know that's going to be important to everybody here. So I wanted to start with a brief intro. So who am I? My name is Andrew Shulz, and I'm currently a third-year PhD student at Georgia Tech. If you're not familiar where Georgia Tech is, it's in Atlanta, Georgia, which is in the southeastern United States, right above Florida, right above the Florida Panhandle. I'm a mechanical engineer, which might not make a lot of sense. I think a lot of people that work with elephants are obviously like biologists, vets, and what is an engineer doing working with elephants? And you can see here I'm a volunteer at Zoo Atlanta. So as part of aside from my research, I do work with. So this is Kelly on the bottom left, who's now a 38-year-old female African elephant. We're doing foot care with her there, and then on the bottom right was me with the elephant in. Where was I? It's Bellabel Limpopo in South Africa, where I was doing some field work there. But I don't just work as a researcher. I also am passionate about teaching. So I'm an educator, and this is what I'm going to end with, and why I was working some with the Eagles is I work to kind of go through this process of educating, designing, testing, and delivering technology with different conservation organizations. So how can, and I educate students about that. So we have about 20 students at Georgia Tech that I work with that are working on about 6 to 10 different projects of how can we use technology to help end this mass extinction that we're experiencing right now. And I think a lot of times researchers can be construed as not really human. And I wanted to talk some about what do I do outside of my workday. And so in the top left, I do martial art Hapkido. So that's me in the back left with Hapkido Club here at Georgia Tech. I'm a Zoo Atlanta docent, so I work on doing some different research tours and stuff at Zoo Atlanta. Obviously, a lot of these pictures were taken pre-COVID. And then I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the bottom right. And then one of the reasons I have like a fancy camera and the fancy microphone is I've done some streaming on twitch.tv to talk about conservation. So I'm a mechanical engineer, and this is a picture of me when I was a kid, probably quite a few, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I went to Kruger National Park in South Africa with my mom, and I was able to see elephants for the first time. And I've always, since I've been a kid, been fascinated by animals, but I didn't really think I was going to ever get to work with something as amazing as them, especially as a mechanical engineer. And how did I get from this point as a mechanical engineer to working with elephants? And where that comes in, and these are I'm going to limit the scientific jargon as much as I can today, but where this comes from in mechanical engineering is elephants are known as a muscular hydrostat, right? Which what this is, it's a fancy word used by originally by William Keir. And what this describes is the trunk as essentially a muscle, and it's purely a muscular appendage, right? They don't have bones, they don't have joints, they just have muscle. And this is similar to dog and other mammal tongues, as well as octopus arms, where it's purely muscular. Now, there's also hydroskeletons, which is commonly referred to as well, which are things like starfish, sea anemone, as well as caterpillars, where it's not just muscle, but they have this hydroskeleton around muscle to help them move. And where I come in is these have been used for a long time to advance robotics in different ways. So 12 years ago, you can kind of see this resembles an elephant's trunk of trying to make a robot that is inspired by it, because elephants, their trunks are super versatile and they can use their trunks for a range of things. So the ideas of how these elephant trunks have been able to move, and this is a photoshopped picture from Festo corporate, of a handling assistant that would be able to move similar to an elephant trunk, and they photoshopped it handing an apple to the trunk. But we can really gain inspiration from these elephants, and it's really interesting. But there's a part of this that bothers me, and the part of bioinspiration that's always bothered me is, so it's great that we can get inspiration from these superpowers and these amazing things like the elephant trunk in nature, but we also need to make sure that we can continue to gain inspiration and preserve the species that are on this planet. So this is something I'm sure most people here are aware, but we're experiencing something that's referred to as a great acceleration right now, which is where essentially we're in a mass extinction that is caused by humans. So how can we use things like technology and working with conservation and partnering with conservation organizations to help preserve these species so future generations can continue to see them in the wild? And I include on the bottom right, this is a drone with a camera on it, because this is what I think a lot of people classify as like conservation technology. And this is where, you have a drone that's looking at poachers commonly in Africa. But this is just one example. And we're doing a lot of different projects, including some with eagles and foxes that I'll talk about here in the end. So to kind of move into talking about trunks. So I said that they're assumed to be a muscular hydrostat. So fancy word again, and this means muscle, muscular appendage that can move. And one of the things about the elephant trunk that makes it fascinating as a muscular hydrostat is it really, you can boil it down to these 4 specific movements. And I know some of the videos are going to be pixelated, but work with me here. Is the first being elongation. So right, an elephant trunk can stretch and grab different objects, and then the opposite of that is shortening. And this might look kind of strange. Well, Andrew, why are you showing me a picture of an elephant drinking water? Well, what happens is they engorge their nostrils, right? And so that causes them to actually shrink their trunk down a little bit and shorten it. Then I'm sure that you've all seen bending and twisting. So bending in one direction and then twisting in the other in order to grab food. And this is one of the first experiments we did, which was an elephant trunk bending around and twisting around food. Now, the 5 main tasks that have commonly been described with trunks are manipulation, and this is mainly what I study, is I study how the trunk is able to manipulate around. I'm sure y'all have heard and seen this in the wild, as well as in any sort of thing that you've done, where elephants will use their trunks for breathing. So they can put their trunks above water when they're in very deep water to use as like a snorkel. Sound production, touching. So the elephant trunk shake that I think people have documented and seeing, and then olfaction. So this bottom left picture is actually from a study that was done that showed elephant trunks are able to detect bombs at a higher percentage than TNT. And the way that this was observed was it was observed that elephants were avoiding certain areas in the wild in Africa. Then when they looked at some of those areas, they noticed that they had landmines. So it led some scientists to kind of hypothesize about this. And John introduced with talking about the muscle, and this is what was pretty astounding to me was when I started this research a few years ago, a lot of what documents that we have of what is inside of an elephant's trunk goes back over 100 years to this Bose 1908 hand drawing of the muscles inside the trunk. And the last thing that I kind of talk about with this is that I'm sure if you're familiar or you've been close to an elephant, one of the big things and big differences that I am looking at right now is I study African elephants. And African elephants, from that first slide, you see it grabbing a little potato chip. African elephants have two fingers that are muscularly actuated or can be moved on the tip of their trunk, whereas Asian elephants only have one with the cartilage bulb on the bottom. So African elephants, for me, there's this additional kind of grabbing mechanism that's really makes them fascinating to study. So who are the elephants that I get to work with? So I work with Zoo Atlanta, which is 10 miles away from me. And currently I'm working with, need to update the ages on some of these because I think Kelly just turned 38. But I work with Kelly, Misholo, and Tara, who are all African bush elephants. And then I also have done some anatomy and looked at what does the internal part of the trunk look like. So that is a specimen on the bottom right there that I'm excited to talk to you all a little bit about. So each of these animals has its own personality, and we're able to learn a lot of really fascinating things by each one of the studies that we do. So with that, I'll kind of dive into some of the experiments. And when we first started this, we didn't really know a lot. We didn't know how an elephant moves, how it grabs, how it wraps from like a simple physics perspective. So one of the first things that we looked at was, well, if we just put some weights in front of an elephant, how does it actually wrap around it? And it looks like a very simple experiment because it is. What we did is we had an elephant, we put chalk on the side of its trunk, and we observed how it lifted weights that were as small as 20 kilos all the way up to 60 kilograms. And something we found that was pretty amazing from this is you can see 60 kilograms there is really difficult for an elephant to lift. But previous, documentation, if you look online, says they can lift something like 400, 500 kilograms, right? But a lot of that does not use their trunk, right? A lot of that is they're using their neck, their head, their legs, kind of doing a full body workout. So when it's just their trunk, right, they're not as strong in terms of how much they can lift. And what we see is what we predict from just wrapping is elephants could lift about 65 kilos. So not very much. And it's been shown that with this experiment, we were able to limit it. So only the elephant trunk was able to move without using its head, neck, stuff as we were going to move. But how is the elephant actually lifting these things? And I love this. I love this physics problem, and it's the capstan problem. And what it is on ships, they talk about a capstan is the amount of times you wrap rope around like a wooden pole, and that angle is known as the capstan, right? And if we look at the capstan of as elephants use more and more of their trunk, it's actually pretty accurate, where what they're doing is they're utilizing more and more of that trunk and those wrinkles to contact the barbell and to contact the weight to actually lift it, which is really interesting. So they're behaving kind of like a rope, actually, where you're wrapping it around. And ropes are very, very flexible, just like the trunk. And it was really interesting to see just how they were doing this. But what was confusing to us is how that they were really able to lift some of the weights very easily. And this is probably the most mathy my slides will get. But if we look at the power, right? So how much power or force divided by times velocity, so how fast it's moving. If we look at the power of the trunk, what we found is that it increases and then it decreases, which what's very strange, but also very cool about this is it mimics that of human weightlifters, because what's happening here, and this further shows our point of like the 65 kilograms, is as you approach the amount of weight that you can only do one repetition of. So as it gets like heavier and heavier, and you think of like an Olympic weightlifter lifting the heaviest weight they possibly can, right? They're only doing one repetition. They're only lifting that weight up and down once. And we see decreased power towards the maximum weight that an elephant can lift. And as we said, we predicted here the elephant's maximum amount of weight they could lift is about 65 to 70 kilograms. And we see that this is sharply decreasing towards that one repetition maximum, which is likely what 60 kilograms is. But that was hopefully this will be published this summer. We're finalizing and hopefully submitting that. But I wanted to transition a bit into one of the more recent studies that we've done, and the one that was just published about some of how elephants use their trunk to drink and to kind of move and manipulate water and different fluids. So I just put this in because I figured that this would be really, really cool for those who haven't seen. But this is actually a CT scan of the internal muscular parts of the elephant trunk. So it's pretty pixelated and difficult to see. But what I think is amazing about this is you can see how thick the skin is all the way around the entirety of the trunk, right? And then you have these muscles and the two nasal passages. So we've been able to actually look at, we can figure out now how is that nasal passage expanding in the trunk. And why that's important is when we look at how they drink water, we need to understand how they also store that water, because a misconception a lot of people believe that I've tried to correct a lot of times is people believe that elephant trunks actually they use their trunks like straws. So they stick their trunks in water and they drink it up, but it's actually a trunk. It's actually a storage mechanism for that water. So I love this video. It's a 3D rendering of that CT scan. So you take all of that, and what's really cool about this is we can see those wrinkles on the top of the trunk. We can see those folds and those really, really large gaps. And what we also can do is we can look at the dead space in the middle. So those nasal passages, and this is what allows us to accurately look at what the outside geometry and the internal geometry, what their relationship is with an elephant. And just a few brief kind of slides of data, and then I'm going to show some of the videos. But if we look at how an elephant actually drinks, right? Though we didn't really know how we're going to be able to visualize this. How can we actually look at how an elephant drinks? And so what we did is we used chia seeds, and these chia seeds helped us actually see the flow of how the elephant was drinking. And what's so fascinating about these experiments is you'll see we'll have a larger picture of this video, but we put a high-speed camera that's able to, do 300, 400 frames in a second below the elephant when it's drinking. And what we saw was that as the elephant's drinking, those nostrils are expanding and they're getting larger by a pretty large amount, 10 to 15%, which seems odd because, right, with a human, we don't really have muscles around our nose, right? It's all cartilage. So what they're actually doing is they're pulling, or what it appeared they were doing is pulling those nostrils apart. to actually make more area so they can drink more water and be more efficient. And when we looked at them drinking chia seeds, what we found is that they're able to drink about 3 liters of water in a second, right? So this is a blown up video of that, and I will go ahead and mute it. But you can, the other part that's really cool here is you can see as they drink, right? I'm going to replay this again, and I know it's probably hard to see, but you can see the difference of flow. You can see in the middle, the chia seeds moving really, really quickly, and then they move slower and slower on the outside. And so this gives us a flow profile that we're able to actually see how the trunk is able, to move. And I'll show this once and I'll show it again after I talk about the nostril there. But you can sort of see it there that the nostrils are getting larger. And this is fascinating because the other structures that are similar to the elephant trunk are octopus arms as well as tongues. And neither of those have these giant holes through the middle. So these make the elephant trunk really unique of studying to understand how some of these muscles are working together. So this is one of my favorite experiments from this last paper. So what we were curious of is, well, we see that at the tip, these nostrils are increasing in size, but is that actually recreated as we get closer and closer to the base of the trunk? So what we were able to do is use ultrasound to on the side of the trunk to look at how is the nostril and how is the muscle between the nostril and the skin, how is it moving as they're breathing, as they're drinking water. And we actually mix the water with bran to thicken it. So we could look at as the water becomes thicker, what are they doing? And it was fascinating because we found that their diameter could increase from about 3 to almost 3.75 or 4 centimeters. So usually for water, about a 10% dilation, increase in dilation. And then for the heavier and the more dense things like water, like the bran water, up to 16%. So that's cool, but why are they doing that? Well, when we were looking at this video, one of the reasons we thought that it could be is when we saw them drinking water, they're drinking this water at like 3 liters per second. Where are they putting all of that water? Well, we talked earlier about we have the CT scan to see how much nostril they have, and they were overfilling their nostril. So it didn't really make sense of how they're able to drink water. And the way that elephants do drink and store water is in the back of their head, they have a piece of cartilage and a muscle, and they're able to kind of close shut, right? And that's what forms a vacuum for them to store that water inside their trunk. So with this video, what we noticed is, okay, well, if that diameter is increasing that much through the entirety of the trunk, what does that do? And for the heavier bran water, it was actually increasing the trunk volume by about 60%, which is insane to think about. They were able to, they were never overfilling their trunk because they were able to dilate their nostrils to regulate getting more water into their trunk in a more efficient way, which is absolutely cool and fascinating. So the other thing that I really loved about this study is we wanted to understand how elephants use suction. So I'm sure y'all have seen elephants possibly suction up objects at different times. And with African elephants, what they will do is they'll actually suction up tortilla chips, and they'll get these tortilla chips without breaking them. So something that would break under such little force. And one of the ways they do that is they vacuum up, and we've predicted that they're vacuuming at about 150 meters per second. And one of the ways they're able to do this is they have so much volume in their nostril and in their lungs that they can do rapid vacuuming of something like a tortilla chip to pick it up. So I'm going to play this one more time so you can see, but this is slowed down several times so you can actually accurately see, and that's kind of why it looks a little like choppy, but this is with the high-speed camera. And when they use those nostrils to suck up and vacuum up those objects into their trunk, it's really fascinating because they don't just do that with tortilla chips. We looked at them, they did it with rutabaga cubes and a lot of smaller objects. And what regulates when they use suction and when they don't is based on how large the objects are. So one of my favorite articles that was written talked about our paper, talked about elephants being airbenders, so they can actually use air as a tool, right? There, where in terms of different people have documented elephants using tools for different things. Well, air is a tool for them. They're able to use air as a manipulator to either use suction, or they can actually blow out in order to collect food. And I love this video so much because this is sort of showing you a combination of the two. So I'm going to pause this here. And if you look, there's an apple. So this is chia seeds in water, and the elephant already has an apple up near their nostril, but it's trying to get another one. And so what they end up doing is grabs these, but it's grabbed two already, and then you can see it come over here, and it will actually suction up those into their trunk. So after this video, I don't have like after I was there, but after it sucked these up, it moved its trunk outside of the tank and it blew out all the water with no apples at all. So they're able to do a combination of these things too, where they can not just use suction above water to grab something like a tortilla chip, they can use suction above water to, below water as well, to help suction items into their trunk. So this is really cool because if you think of other animals that are able to do some of these things, the other animals are fish and elephants are terrestrial, and they've kind of mastered this ability to use fluid manipulation from a very early age. But if you've ever seen one of those viral photos of elephants with their heads dipped in the water, one of the reasons this is the baby elephants will take somewhat like about a year to actually learn how to use the suction, right? And so they'll have to, in order to drink, they have to dip their entire heads into the water because they don't understand that their trunk is a storage mechanism yet. So all this to say, how is the trunk a muscular multi-tool? Well, I showed two videos here, right? One on the left is an elephant picking up a barbell that is 60,000 grams or 60 kilos. And on the right is an elephant picking up a tortilla chip that is 500 grams. And it does both with ease. And it has different sort of techniques. On the left, it uses muscle and like the power of its muscle. On the right, it's being a little bit more almost graceful, where it's using air and suction, so it doesn't actually break this tortilla chip as part of food. And this is how it's a multi-tool. Elephants use their trunks to grab objects, but they have all of these different mechanisms of how they actually grab objects. So I'm going to transition some in the talk here, and then we'll go into questions. But what's next with elephants? And I think a lot of y'all, it sounds like there's some debates about anatomy. But one of the things I'm fascinated by, and always been fascinated when I work with elephants, is their skin. And this is what I'm starting to do now is look at, okay, if we look at very, very small. So this is a figure drawn by Ben Celeb, who's one of my collaborators here at Georgia Tech. If we look underneath the skin and we look at, so this here is at the centimeter level, and this is at the micrometer level. If we look at something that is outside of what a human eye can see, how is the elephant skin so flexible yet so strong? And it's a really fascinating question for us to really think about, not just the skin, but also the muscle. So my hope is that we will continue, well, not my hope is we will continue to do this research. And one of the things I hope to have an answer for you in the future is how many muscles does the elephant trunk actually have? Because it's definitely not 40,000. It's not 40,000 muscles. We know that. It's most likely a collection of several meter long muscle fibers. So you could, if you think of each of those as a muscle, they're actually spiralized along the trunk, which is similar to mammalian penises, actually. And that's what is one of the things that gives them their dexterity. So I want to talk a little bit about one more thing, which is conservation. So how I asked this question earlier, but how can we make sure that we continue to gain inspiration from nature? And this is something that's so important to me and so important to think about when we're looking at elephants, because obviously they both African bush elephants, African forest elephants, and Asian elephants have all gotten closer to extinction in the last year. And one of the ways that I do this is using a term that's known as human wildlife center design. So I think a common term in the industry of conservation is human wildlife conflict or human wildlife interaction. And this idea is the relationship that humans and wildlife have. And what I work with my students on is how can we look at that relationship and build technology that is going to help foster a non-negative relationship between humans and wildlife. And how can we design things based on that? So that's what human wildlife center design is. And a lot of people, I had this picture earlier, a lot of people immediately associate it with drones and say, well, that's just drones. But you can use a combination of different techniques. And you'll notice here, I'm not saying like every single thing is like a drone or, a camera, right? You can use genetics. So one of the big things in genetics right now is there's a lot of mislabeling and how can we actually look at genetics of things like fish to understand where is that fish from? Was it actually from a sustainable farm? Is it mislabeled? What did that fish consume in its life? Is it from a fishery? A lot of different data. This is an audio moth, which is really cool. It's an open source piece of technology that actually can detect different audio signals like bird calls, and it can identify birds based on that. Then policy, things like anti-poaching laws, and then finally technology. So this is the Impossible Burger, which is a burger purely made from plants, right? And the hope is that it gives some of the same flavors as red meat, but it has a lot less carbon emissions per, so helping with climate change. So there's a few terms I want to briefly define. And the first is frugal science. So this is what's commonly used in this space. And what this is so this is a fold scope, which is like a 16-cent microscope. And what this is actually using affordable science for everyone. So it's making it kind of universally deployable, right? And a lot of times it's not actually working with the humans, working with the animals. It's just kind of designed to be cheap, and then everybody is able to use it. So then there's citizen or community science projects. And some of these you might have heard of, but this is getting the entire community involved in identifying things. So as an example of having local people that are living in and around elephants reporting sightings, right? So you can actually track different elephants using a community. And this is what I do is I work on co-creating with communities. And this is where what we try and do is we make indigenous technologies. So where the communities that we're working with, we're not just designing technologies for them, but we're designing technologies with their values and their traditions in the background. So we're able to really have buy-in with the community. And I didn't work on this project, but one of my favorite examples of this is, and this figure is from David Chavez and Michael Gavin in 2018 did a really cool study. But there was a tribe in Africa that had a cultural ceremony that was a coming of age ceremony. And one of the things they did as part of this coming of age ceremony was they would get pelts, right, from local wildlife. But they really didn't like that they did it because they were harming a lot of the endangered species. And so what ended up happening is they worked with some fabric manufacturers to make very, very well mimicked furs that they could use for their ceremonies. And that way they could still embrace the ceremonies in the same way that they used to be able to, but they didn't have to do anything in terms of killing any local wildlife. And it's been a very big success of a project. So the first project I wanted to talk about is creating a cheap open source tracking device for wildlife conservation. So what this is we worked specifically with the American Eagle Foundation, and what this project was looking at is so currently, I'm not sure if anyone here works with trackers, but they're usually thousands of dollars, and they can be very expensive, very bulky. And so what we looked at doing is we designed a tracker using with collaboration with a startup in Europe that was attachable to a bird's tail feather. It could give position, and like you could track data on that bird anywhere in the United States and Canada. And it weighed under 300 grams, and it cost $50 to $400 per one. And then everything was open source, so anybody in the community could access that. And I'm happy to say we were successful in designing this. And I know this is going to be hard to see, but this is where we did some test runs. And this is one of the things that I was busy with yesterday, so I apologize, is what we did is we were able to actually take an eagle, and we're able to have an eagle fly, and it's going to be right here at the end that you'll be able to see it. But you can see on its tail feather here, there is what that is that's the tracker we designed, and it ended up only being 50 grams. And this 50-gram tracker, right, is under $100. So under $100 for every single animal. And we're looking at applying this not just to eagles, but to other species that can that biologists and conservationists can use these completely open source, so anybody has access to trackers that are very low cost, and they require pretty low technology in order to implement. And then and that's the project that I really wanted to highlight. But a lot of this work would not be possible without like a huge team, and I mean a huge team. And the first team that I would just like to thank in my acknowledgments is, so these are the 6 elephant keepers for the 3 African elephants at Zoo Atlanta, Katie, Scott, Steve, Nate, Josh, and Caleb. And each of them has contributed not just to helping me with doing experiments or doing research at the zoo, but every single day of helping make sure that I am doing things for the right reasons, that I'm looking at conserving the species, and how is the research I'm doing having an impact on conservation. Then people from around the world have helped me, from Imperial College in London, people at Zoo Atlanta, and then a medical school in terms of doing the dissections, have helped me in my research, the Center for Teaching and Learning, and my teaching. And then, like I said, I teach and I'm an educator. And so a lot of my students are the ones that are actually the ones that are doing most of the field work, that are on the ground and doing a lot of these studies, and things would not be successful without their help. And then I've had several undergraduate students that have helped me throughout the way. And then a huge thank you to Ben Celeb, who some of his drawings, he's a scientific artist, have been featured throughout the other slides. And finally, I would like to thank my family for helping support me through a lot of this. And with that, I will take any questions.
Andrew, fantastic. Thank you very much. Great to have actually such enthusiasm, and you've answered several of my questions already, the ones that come up regularly on the live stream, and a lot more besides. So that was fantastic. Your next challenge before we go on to questions, is to design a tracker that an elephant cannot remove with its trunk or any part of its body and cannot destroy. Because as you said, they come in the thousands, and
well, and that's what's really, I think, amazing about some of that is when I heard that, I thought it was a really easy question. I've had that question before, and then you're like, oh, you just put it on its neck, or you can put it on its back, and then you watch an elephant for a little while, and you're like, wait, they can kind of reach almost anywhere on their body. So that's a really excellent question, and one of the things, actually, I think we have a fall project that we're going to be working with students to try and look at exactly all of the places on an elephant's body that they can reach, and where are some of the blind spots, so we can actually design any sort of technology that could interface with an elephant in order to track it. And then the other challenges are elephants go in water, and then they'll throw sand, mud, dirt, and everything all over their body. So it's gotta be able to deal with some wear and tear.
Well, we have elephants and we have science-minded teams. So if you ever need need elephants to work on, I know we're a long way away, but let us know, because it's a problem that one of the things that we do, not in as a dedicated fashion as you do, is to try and see how our elephants here who live with us in captivity can inspire conservation and can help with conservation. So yep, let's talk, as this is fascinating to me. I will now hand over to either Kun or Dr. Nisa, whoever's on, to ask any questions that may be on the live stream.
Actually, I thinking the same one. We need one for our elephant as well.
Well, I think it's one of the things that I hope is what's been awesome is working with the students. So the bottom right picture here is the first class of students that we had. And so it was, we had 10 and we've grown to almost 30 now. And what we're trying to do is, and I mean this, is work with organizations like yourself and look at how can we actually design something that you can use, right? Instead of just giving you a piece of technology and saying, use this, is what we're really trying to do is understand the behavior of the animals that are using the technology. And so the Eagle tracker, I go back to one of the first questions we had was, it's like, yeah, are they just going to turn around and, peck at it twice and it's going to get destroyed? And what we had to do is look at like putting it on different feathers and what feathers can an eagle actually reach and which ones. And the experts, the eagle experts, were able to inform us of that. So we are working on it. I promise you that. But one of the parts about my research I don't think I highlighted probably as much as it's fascinating to me that I talked about elephants using suction to reach and grab food and all this. And one of the questions I got was, do Asian elephants do this? And I had no idea, because all of the research I've ever done has been with African bush elephants. And I think Joshua Plotnick on Twitter mentioned that he had not seen anything like that in terms of, I think I'm going to misquote him, but he said it's a very different type of thing than he's seen with Asian elephants. And so a lot of these challenges are very different between the species, and because they have a lot of different things that they're able to actually accomplish and do. So yeah.
Well, I know they can suck. We haven't tried it underwater. We know they can suck food up into their trunk and blow it back into their mouth. So again, yep, if you want, send us a high-speed camera and we'll let you know what's going on. Although probably we all have one in our phones nowadays. The other challenge for the tracker, just before we get on to questions, is it can't use mobile phone technology otherwise, because we're right in the Golden Triangle, and when elephants in the wild move, they move between countries and will rack up a huge roaming bill. Although I did read that there's and there was an eagle in Europe somewhere did the same, or in Russia did the same thing, didn't it? It went to Iran and racked up thousands of dollars worth of roaming. Anyway, sorry, over to
yeah, no, that's there's and I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize is the amount of space that elephants can move through, right? Is that they're going to move 2 kilometers a day, right? And when you look at how they're able to, you know, cross countries in such a small amount of time, the fast movement of them is really is real. And not just that, but if you're not using cell phone towers and those types of things, how can you have it work in any sort of environment? So if they're covered in water, if they're if they're in a desert, right? All of those different sorts of things, because they really are uh, habitable to almost anywhere. And that's one of the really interesting parts in terms of different types of ecodomes. So, yeah.
Okay. I actually don't have much question from Facebook. It's only one from Rebecca. Is that the strength of the jawbones involved with lifting, or they just only eating and crunching stuff?
So it's,
So wait,
we don't, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we don't know if it's strictly the jaw, but we know it's the entirety of the head. So when the elephants were lifting, so let me go back real quick to that slide. When the elephants were lifting, right, what we were able to do is in the habitat, right, we were able to make sure that the elephant wasn't using their head, right, in terms of to lift. And when we looked at how they're able to lift and you kind of move the weight closer, right? They're able to like make this thing fly off the seams, right? And this experiment's kind of funny because after a few trials, the elephants actually broke the entire experimental setup because they slammed the weight down so hard that, I mean, it kind of fell into pieces. So what they're able to do is when you see them lifting logs and things, they're using their entire body, including their head, their neck. I say jaw in terms of just their neck muscles, right? To do a lot of that lifting rather than just using the musculature of the trunk. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Give me a few seconds to check more.
And I just made a comment, but anyway, Dr. Nisa, oh, we have to do that. We have a multi-gym, we have elephants, we have a target training area. We have to do elephant weightlifting.
No, and what I would encourage is, right, is a lot of what I think is cool about this is it would be fascinating to look at the differences between the species, right? Because one of the interesting parts is that hand drawing from Bose in 1908, right? This was only done of Asian elephants. So one of the other things that we're looking at with doing some of these dissections is, you know, you asked about the 40,000 muscle thing. Well, what are some of the differences between the African elephant and the Asian elephant with their trunk anatomy? Because are they able to do different things? And one of the questions that I'm fascinated with in respect to this is we've looked a lot about at elephant skin, as I talked about, and you think of African elephant skin has to deal with really, really harsh non-humid climates. So it's very cracked in these pores. And if you look at Asian elephant skin, it's a lot less cracked and it's a lot less almost dense and armor-like. And so on this, just the skin surface, they're probably very, very different. And I don't think it is crazy to think that those differences continue as you get closer and closer to the nostrils. So, yeah. Any
Okay.
other questions?
Yeah. The question from Ram. So if African savanna elephant need to pick glass, then a single finger and a butt seems more economical instead of two fingers. The question is, does the African elephant use the trunk fingertips in a way that the second bottom finger is not for grasp, but pulling stuff, which needs more dedicated pulling?
Yeah, so great question. So I for other audience members that might not know, African elephants are browsers and Asian elephants are grazers. So African elephants, right, you have two fingers. And so if you think of something like seeing a giraffe eat really high leaves, African elephants do the same thing. So they need the second finger in order to grab something like a leaf, an apple. You can think of like pulling a fruit off of a tree. whereas Asian elephants are grazers. So they don't need that second opposable finger in order to grab things such as grass. So in terms of using that second finger, a lot of times what they use that finger for in African elephants is as an opposable thumb. So what I would recommend person that asked that question to do is to think about what you do in your daily life if you don't have a thumb. How do you actually grab and move some of those objects? So, right, what you have to do is you have to kind of press against the bottom of your hand. But doing things like I'm thinking of my favorite one is to try and pull toilet paper without using a thumb. Right, it's really, really difficult because you're not able to actually kind of have a good grip to pull and use force for. So they use it to grab a lot of different objects, to move objects, to grab things like twigs and leaves. And they do it, I would probably hypothesize, in a pretty different way than Asian elephants. So this top left picture you can see here, this is a cartilage bulb on Asian elephants, whereas African elephants, it's another finger. And one of the things I just said that we are going to talk about skin, but the other thing we're actually looking at is the hairs. So not sure if everybody here knows, but elephants actually have whiskers. So it's the fancy word is vibrissae, and a lot of these vibrissae are concentrated in the African elephant at these two fingertips. So I think it's another thing that they use, is it's a way that they use to sense everything that is around them by moving and kind of sensing things with these hairs. John, it looks like that triggered something.
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with that, but I'm also going to, I as a long-time student of the Asian elephant, I would debate that they are very, very good at using they're not actually just grazers, but I guess the answer is they don't rely as much on browse as the African elephant or the African savanna elephant has to.
I think
they're very, very good with their opposable. The pad is like an opposable thumb, so they can still, with a combination of suction and everything else, pick up single sunflower seeds and things like that. So I know you know this. I'm just
and so I think
stand up for my elephant.
And so I think a lot of what people think is in terms of the question being, and I don't know this, but what I would guess is that the Asian elephants eventually evolved to not need that muscle there, and they can still do most of the exact same things. Being so, when I say, and it's kind of funny, this is all the biology terminology, but when they say African elephants are browsers and Asian elephants are grazers, it's probably like African elephants eat 60% of their food is browse and 40% is grazing. And then Asian elephants, it's 60% grazing and 40% browsing. So they're very, very similar. And that's, and I appreciate you standing up for it. But what I think is fascinating about that, right, is that's what's so unique about these differences, is if they're able to do the same thing, and the person that asked the question, I think, was hinting at this, if you don't even have the bottom as a sensorized, like a muscle, then how are they able to do things like, could an Asian elephant pick up a tortilla chip without breaking it? And the way that the African elephant does that is by flattening both and then suctioning it up and grabbing. And so most likely an Asian elephant could, they're just going to do it in a different way because they don't have that muscle, but it's probably going to look very, very similar because they can still actuate that nub. Just it would look and appear to be very different because when you look at their anatomy, it looks very different, but they probably use suction the exact same way and then would grasp it in a very similar way as well.
When given a local sort of tortilla chip that we have around here, a rice chip, they break them, but they still eat them. Then you get back into the efficiency question, as I've always wondered, and that's another, how on earth is it efficient to pick up a single seed and put in all the energy the trunk uses? But we should go on to our audience's questions, because you and I could probably talk about this for years.
For days.
Energy efficiency is amazing, because the trunk, how much energy does that trunk burn, and how can it be worth it to pick up a single sunflower seed just for the taste?
And one of the things that I'm really interested in too is when we think of the elephants as a muscle, how do we know when the elephant trunk is relaxed, right? So like I'm sitting in this chair and I can tell you that a lot of my muscles are not really having to work to for me to sit down. But when an elephant is just standing there with its trunk hanging, how many is that actually relaxed? Or a lot of those muscles, right, like completely tensed up to make sure that blood is still flowing and they're still able to kind of regulate heat and temperature. But yeah, again, we could talk about this for days. We can go to audience questions.
Okay. Another question from Rebecca. Is there a difference in musculature from proximal to distal?
Yes, great question. So, okay, let's talk about a few things for other audience members so they know. So I'm going to open up this this picture here. So proximal, distal, dorsal, ventral. We'll talk about these things. So dorsal is the top part of the trunk. So if you're looking at an elephant, you can think of it as the part that you're seeing as really, really wrinkled. Ventral is the underside of the trunk. So if you think of your hand, right, dorsal is the top of your hand, ventral is the bottom of your hand. Now, proximal, distal is the tip of the trunk, right? And then proximal is as you get closer and closer to the base and to the tusks. So again, dorsal, ventral, and then distal is at the tip, and then ventral is at the base. So just so everybody kind of understands the zones that we're talking about. And the answer is yes. So when we look at the trunk's anatomy, they have these different types of muscles. They have muscles that help with their elongation. They have muscles that help change their radius. But at the tip of the trunk, you'll notice, so I'm going to go back to this. So if you look at the cross section here, it's very circular. So they have everything is kind of looks nice, right? It's circular. It looks very kind of normal no matter where you look. But as you get closer and closer to the tip, it actually starts to generate this kind of little concavity, right? You have this little kind of peak here. And the reason is because at the tip of the trunk, and what we're still looking at exactly where it is, but probably the first about 50 centimeters of the trunk, they have these two oblique muscles. And if you know, elephants can move their trunks from side to side. But if you've ever seen an elephant, they can only do that for a certain portion of their trunk. And the way that they're able to do that is they have those two oblique muscles. So if you think of having something like an arm and you have two strings attached to it, right? If you pull one string, it moves it one way, and you pull the other and it moves the other. And so that's what they're doing is in the front part of their trunk, they have those two oblique muscles. So as we say, front part of the trunk, the more distal portion has those two muscles. But then as you get back to the base or the proximal portion of the trunk, it's very only those muscles that help with elongation and then looking at dilation. So they're only really able to wrap in terms of from a side view in the front portion of the trunk. And I see John agreeing with me. So it sounds like 50 to 60 centimeters, I think is a pretty hypothesized thing, but I think it's pretty well understood. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Nope. But yeah, a lot of good comments about your presentation today, because we mostly work with biology, those kind of thing. But today it's physics and biology together. Very fascinating.
And I will it is Facebook, and I know, but I will let me just do this actually really quickly just for just let me go in, and I'm going to give me a second here. And if people have questions for me, they can email me, and this is my email. So let me go back to presentation mode. So this is my email. So if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask or follow up, anything like that, please send me an email. I'm usually pretty good at replying. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I absolutely love to talk about elephants, and I'm definitely going to follow up with everybody here, because it's been it's kind of weird because it's 10 p.m. for me now, and I'm like all pumped up because I've been talking about elephants for the last hour. But thank you, everybody, for your questions, and thanks for listening. So
brilliant. Well, thank you very much for being here, and yes, also for giving us, as Ul said, physics and biology put together and answering questions that come up on the live stream. Those of you who join the live streams, do not test me. I have been paying attention, but I haven't taken everything in. I have worked out now the difference between proximal and distal, and I didn't know we had dorsal fins, but dorsal. But
yeah,
fantastic. We have also some new facts to give to people on the live stream. The elephant valve, people often ask me about that. Do they have a valve at the top? And I've always said no, but they do have one, which presumably one of the vets could have told me anyway, but never mind. All very fascinating. Thank you very much, Andrew, and great to see such enthusiasm. And yes, I'm already thinking, please do send us the experimental setup for the elephant weightlifting, because we do have a gym here, and we do have weights that nobody ever uses. So I'm sure it would be lovely to take it to the target training wall and see if we can do some weightlifting with the elephants.
Yeah, and I would love to. So we'll be in touch. So thank you, everybody, and yeah, shoot me any questions that you have.
Yep.
So thank you.
Cool. Thank you. And next week we do have a non-elephant professional lecture. Next week we're moving away from elephants. We're going to talk about the Mekong, and we have Brian Ela, who wrote The Last Days of the Mighty Mekong, who's going to be talking about the river and the effects of the industrialization along the river. It does affect us, of course, because our grassland is within 500 meters of that river, and whether we flood or not in natural pattern depends very, very much on the flow of that river. So it does affect elephants, but it's not going to be a pure elephant lecture next week. Meanwhile, I think at 10:30 we will be going live, or the ladies will be going live in Thai on the live stream in Kin Cafe Cap Tang, and I am back at 4 o'clock this afternoon with one of my live streams on Facebook. And I have to learn about Twitch as well. Now I know you're also a streamer. That's about it. Thank you very much for watching. Fascinating, great to see such enthusiasm for elephants and keys for collaboration in future. We have elephants here who are not exactly doing nothing, but they are ready in their natural habitat to be studied, and also because of our target training work, can replicate some of the zoo experiments as well. So until 10:30 with the ladies, or 4 o'clock this afternoon with me, from myself, thank you very much. And Andrew, can you just say goodbye and take us out?
Goodbye. Thank you so much.